right, everyone, so we're going to get started. Thank you so much for being here. I just wanted to say thanks to everyone for coming, and especially thanks to Mary Jo Rossetti, Alderman at Large, and Dan Futrell from the Ward 2 School Committee. We're really happy that you guys are here, and actually we're really happy that everyone is here to be able to have this conversation. It's been going on a lot in Somerville. People trying to figure out how can the community really play a decisive role in new development so that development isn't happening to us, but we're shaping what's going on in the community and we're ensuring development without displacement. So we're really happy to have two speakers here with us today who can kind of help us wrestle with some of those questions. And we also have a lot of Union United members and other community members in the audience that we can kind of have a dialogue around that. So I wanted to introduce our speakers. First we have John Goldstein, who's been working with community coalitions started in the labor movement, doing organizing work with bus drivers and riders, and got involved in community benefits agreements through a major redevelopment project in Milwaukee, and actually has spent the last 10 years working on CBAs with community coalitions. He now lives in Newark, New Jersey, but came up to Somerville to see what's going on here, and is going to talk about some of the really successful examples of CBAs with community coalitions, developers, and city government. And then we're going to have Leroux, who's the executive director of the Massachusetts Smart Growth Alliance. He's been the ED there for 8 years. Before that, he worked in state government, in CDCs at Lawrence Community Works, and also has done urban planning in Mexico City, and lives in Medford, but used to live in Somerville, and used to be on the board actually of SCC. So he's going to be talking about some of the smart growth proposals that are at the state level, particularly the community benefits district legislation and how that applies to Union Square through the LOCUS process, and sort of what that agenda is. So they're going to speak first and then have a chance for some dialogue, and then you guys get a chance to ask questions. But if you have to leave, I'm going to put a little sheet by the door. If you have to leave and you have a question that didn't get answered, you can write it down and we'll figure out a way to try to answer it later on. So without further ado, John, I'll give you the floor.
It's good to be here. It was very interesting today. Karen and I took a walk around the neighborhood, and much to my surprise, there actually is not a square at Union Square. And the properties that I've been reading about for a couple of years now are not blocks surrounding a square. In fact, it was really interesting for me, and always it's interesting to sort of get to see what I've been reading about. And so it's good to be here.
Most of our squares aren't actually squares.
Right. So I say, so I've learned.
Nasty intersections.
So community benefits have been used extensively across the country as a mechanism for communities to ensure a return on their investment, whether it's discounted cost of land, whether it's zoning variances, whether it's subsidies, whether it's tax abatements. Community benefits agreements are a tool in which a community can ensure that the community itself will actually benefit, not only the people who are developing the property. In fact, there's a great graphic Karen copied in the back, and this really kind of says it all, that without a CBA, typically the community groups are going to the city, the developers negotiating a development agreement with the city, and the community's issues are mediated by the city. This is just the way that it has traditionally happened. With a CBA, the community has the ability, there are certain regulations that cities still have. There's zoning powers and things like that are vested in the city. But the community also has the ability to interact directly with the developer. And that's really the classic definition of the CBA, and that's where they've been most successful. And there have been community coalitions that have organized and been able to engage directly with developers over a set of assurances that the community is going to actually benefit from the development. So I'm going to talk a little bit, try to breeze through in a way, some of the CBAs that are most relevant, I think, to what's going on here in Somerville. So in Pittsburgh, a great coalition organized called the One Hill Coalition, a neighborhood called The Hill, adjacent to where they were building a new Penguins ice hockey arena. And the community was interested not only in the arena and the jobs that it would create, but also what was going to happen in the area immediately surrounding the arena. And the coalition was well organized. There were some powerful issues. One, in that community, they previously built the Mellon Arena, which is right next to the new arena, and that was 40 years ago, and people were promised there were going to be jobs for the community, and all these great things were going to happen, and nothing ever happened in the Hill community. And so people remembered that. So that sort of collective memory was really important for that group. The other thing that was important was that the neighborhood had been without a full-service grocery store for many, many years. And so one of the most powerful issues for the community in their community benefits agreement was they wanted a full-service grocery store in their neighborhood. So what did they get? What did they win? And then we'll talk a little bit about what the mechanism was. They got $35.5 million of new investment separate from the arena into the neighborhood, and that was some city money, some redevelopment authority money, some private money, some state money. There were a variety of pots of money, and you'll see in a minute that all those entities were included in the CBA. They got the grocery store, $12.5 million invested in a grocery store. When Shop and Save opened in October 2013, it was the first full-service grocery store in the Hill for over 30 years, and 95% of the workers at the store are people of color. 65% live in the Hill District, in the neighborhood adjacent. So they got their store and more, actually. They got a $13 million investment in a YMCA, a brand new YMCA. Recreational opportunities for kids in the Hill was a big issue, and that was part of the CBA. They have a citizen-led comprehensive master planning process for the rest of the Hill, the area that's not directly impacted by that development. And then a neighborhood partnership program that did a bunch of things like assisting homeowners in fixing up their houses, did some intervention programs with kids. Actually, there were a whole series of a $6 million put into a neighborhood intervention program. So we'll talk in a minute about multi-parties, but I did want to go through a couple of other quickly, some CBAs. Oakland, their big CBA was jobs policies regarding the redevelopment of the Oakland Army base. A huge area, prime real estate on the water in Oakland. And the city's initial proposal was to move all the car dealerships from Oakland onto the Army base, and there would be a big auto mall. And, that didn't create any new jobs. It was just, it didn't seem to be an appropriate use of the land. And the community said that doesn't make sense. We need something that's going to create some good jobs. And it's adjacent to the port, so they developed a logistics hub with groundbreaking jobs provisions that limits on the use of temporary workers, which is almost the only way that warehouse workers are hired these days, but instead they have to hire and have full-time workers. There's a living wage, a wall-to-wall living wage requirement, disadvantage hiring, first source hiring for local residents, and community oversight and enforcement of what's just the shovels are in the ground, and a vast, both the construction and the permanent jobs are pretty important. A third one that I think is also can make you sort of see what's possible is the redevelopment of the Kingsbridge Armory in the Northwest Bronx. Kingsbridge Armory, just as I was talking about what I saw when I came here, when I went to the Northwest Bronx, I was 10 blocks away from going to meet with this coalition, and I could see the Kingsbridge Armory. It's this massive former National Guard armory, and it's I think it's the biggest building in the Bronx. It's just massive, enormous, very Gothic architecture, and it had sat empty for many, many, many years. And so that coalition also fought for a long time. We're going to talk about a little bit later some of the roadblocks they faced, but they won a wall-to-wall living wage payment requirement, which was a big deal because the city had proposed a commercial development, essentially a big mall, but the city wouldn't require living wages for the people that worked there, and the community stood fast for having a living wage requirement. Requirement that 25% of the construction employees are targeted workers, 51% of non-construction workers be local, $8 million initial contribution to a coalition-controlled fund that can be used for specified community needs, a grant program for local businesses, local contracting, minority and women business utilization, extensive green building measures in terms of how the building was going to be reused. What's going in there is a national ice arena, 6 ice skating rinks, and training time for national folks, but also ice time for community folks, and all kinds of hockey and other kinds of programs for community kids. And the community kids don't get the access when no one else wants it at midnight. They actually have priority access to the ice time. And then formal structures for community-based oversight and enforcement. So communities have won some really great stuff using this tool of community benefits agreements. And I wanted to talk a bit about multi-party community benefit agreements, because I think that's sometimes can be pretty confusing, right? The city has a role, and what are all these different roles, and how do they get worked out? And I thought it was useful to show you the signatory pages from Pittsburgh, because there are about 13 signatory pages, 45 signatories to the One Hill CBA, and they included the One Hill Coalition, they included the City of Pittsburgh, the County of Allegheny, the Sports and Exhibition Authority, the Urban Redevelopment Authority, the Pittsburgh Arena Real Estate Redevelopment, which was the hockey team, the Arena Operating Authority, and then a whole slew of community groups, Hill House, Uptown Community Partners, Hill District Consensus Group, Ebony Development, just a whole slew. And they were all signatories to the CBA. And the CBA, the way that the CBA deals with that question of having these multiple partners is that it actually goes through the issues. So I talked about the things that they won, the grocery store, and then who has the responsibilities around the different pieces. So the grocery store, I think there was the state had some role in that. The redevelopment authority did. I think, as I recall, also there were some private requirements for some private funders on that piece. So each piece spells out what the roles and responsibilities are for each group. So that in some ways was the most complex. There are other CBAs that have signatories that are both public and community signatories. The more classic CBAs are just community and developer, and there's a reason for that. There are certain things that body of municipal government cannot do. For example, there are real restrictions in terms of local hire on what a municipality can do, and it has to do with federal law and preemption. There are ways around that, but the easiest way around it is to have a private contract between the community and the developer, and then those questions of what government can and can't do fall by the wayside because government's not involved. Now, government still has, as I said before, some zoning powers that are really important. Government can play a really big role in mapping the contours of the development and also looking beyond the immediate development, what's happening in the neighborhood around it. Those are roles of government, and government should play those roles. But there's no reason that a community, and the most successful community benefit agreements are ones where community organizations are signatories to the community benefit agreement. Kingsbridge, I was talking about in Pittsburgh, all the signatories. At Kingsbridge, there were 26 community groups that were signatory to the CBA. In that case, government's role was separate. Government had to, there was government approval that was necessary, but that was done separately from the CBA. So I think another question, an important one, and it comes up, I'm working with a number of coalitions all around the country right now, and the common issue that comes up everywhere is displacement. When huge investments come into a community, displacement happens. I live in Newark, New Jersey. I'm starting to see it in my neighborhood where, I live in an immigrant neighborhood that's been an immigrant neighborhood for 200 years, and frankly, the last 50 years, no one has wanted to spend a dime in Newark, New Jersey because they were afraid to. People were afraid to go to Newark, New Jersey. But because of our location, our transportation network, and because everything around us has already been developed, they opened a Nike store, there's Whole Foods, there's Starbucks coming, and it's happening in urban communities all across the country, and the impacts are very similar everywhere. That you really see this issue. I think I'm going to get displaced, by the way, and I've been in my apartment 5 years, and I feel like it won't be long till I get displaced. So what are the things that community coalitions are doing? What are the things they're proposing around this question of displacement? And by the way, it's displacement of rental people in rental homes. It's because rents go up. It's displacement of homeowners because property taxes go up, and it's displacement of small businesses because their rents go up, and Starbucks comes in. I don't know why anyone in my neighborhood would prefer Starbucks to the local Brazilian coffee shop where coffee is a third the cost, but it does ultimately have that impact. Maybe because the rents go up for the small business owners. So how do people mitigate? How have people approached mitigating those impacts? And there's actually, I just shared with Karen, there's a sort of nice little toolkit. This isn't in color. I think I gave Karen a color version of it. It's a tool that was developed in Chicago, and it looks at the whole variety of tools that communities can use to mitigate. Mostly, they were looking at the housing impact. So things like first right to purchase, where community development corporation might have the first right to purchase land that is slated for development. Certainly community land trusts, inclusionary zoning ordinances. Most of these, many of you have heard of. Rent protections, tax abatements, freezing property taxes for longtime residents. There are a lot of tools that people have used, and they differ depending on the exact circumstances and what's legal in different places. But there are certainly strategies that people can use to mitigate and to the people who have been historically in a community have some place at this table. And too often they're shut out, and that's really a big part of what community benefit coalitions can do, is actually help raise the voices of people who otherwise are not even thought of in terms of this whole development equation. So CBAs, often the argument is raised that the development won't sustain a CBA, that the CBA will stop the development from happening, that people, CBA coalitions don't understand development. The problem is you people just don't understand it. Developers understand it, but you don't. So, two little stories about that. The first CBA I worked on in Milwaukee was called the Park East Redevelopment Compact, and it dealt with 13 parcels of county-owned land right on the edge of downtown Milwaukee. It was kind of the barrier between a very poor neighborhood and downtown. There had been investment downtown, and the city's version was that there would be this great corridor into downtown. And our coalition's vision was that it should be a corridor that connected the people where there had been no development with the development that was going on downtown, and that people, in these adjacent neighborhoods should have the ability to work, live, raise a family in that neighborhood. So the redevelopment compact was passed. There were no developers at the time. There were 13 parcels of land that the county was selling, and almost immediately there was a huge economic downturn. The real estate market crashed, and all of the people who had opposed the compact said, see, now this land will never get developed. You put those standards in place and it's going to stop development. And and I was living in Milwaukee at the time, and we held our breath and said, this is the business cycle. This isn't the standards, it's the business cycle. Sure enough, as the business cycle started to regain momentum, the parcels started to get bought up, the standards applied. The new basketball arena in Milwaukee, which there's going to be lots of debate about whether or not that's a good idea, but it's going to be in the Park East, and it has to comply with the standards. And the 13th parcel, the last parcel, was just sold. And each of the proposed developments has to meet the standards around construction jobs, use of local labor, maximize apprenticeship opportunities, a whole series of, and payment into an affordable housing fund. And so, and Milwaukee's not a particularly strong real estate market. So, if you can do it there, it seems like you can do it almost anywhere. The other example where naysayers really jumped on the bandwagon in a much bigger way was the Kingsbridge Armory. And it was a long campaign. The Armory had been vacant. The community had tried to organize around it for a long time. And Mayor Bloomberg came up with this proposal to do this big mall, similar to what they've done in some parts of Brooklyn. And the community said, we'll go along with doing this big retail mall if there's assurance that those will be living wage jobs. And the city said, there's no way, we can't enforce that on tenants, and no stores will come in, and so we're not going to do it. And if you insist on that, the Armory will never get redeveloped. Well, the coalition stuck together. It went to a vote of the city council. The city council voted no on Bloomberg's proposal. Bloomberg vetoed the city council's action. The city council, it was the only time the city council overrode Mayor Bloomberg's veto, was saying, we're going to demand that there are good jobs coming out of the Armory. It's our neighborhood. We need to be sure there's good jobs. And then their patience paid off when they ended up with a really groundbreaking proposal, and it's environmentally, sort of the most advanced kinds of energy efficiency, and they really, if you have a chance, you can go to forworkingfamilies.com, and there's a list of CBAs. You can actually read the CBA, and it's pretty amazing. So instead of stopping development, in fact, CBAs in many places have led to broader policies. Los Angeles was the birthplace of CBAs. It's where they've been used most extensively. The Staples Center Agreement, which was not about construction of the Staples Center, but the land surrounding the Staples Center, and their experience in CBAs led to a whole series of city policies mandating standards on all development. And so there's Los Angeles City Living Wage Ordinance, which built off of the living wages that were part of the Staples Center Agreement. Los Angeles City Construction Careers and Green Jobs Policy, Los Angeles Metropolitan Transit Authority Construction Careers Policy, the Century Boulevard Living Wage Ordinance, the Los Angeles Grocery Workers Retention Ordinance, a whole series, and then even in some suburbs, some adjacent communities in Long Beach and in Santa Monica, the idea of standards has now become a legislative requirement. Not that there's a requirement around CBAs, because CBAs are really a function of the community, not a function of government. But requirements around standards, the kinds of standards we're talking about, have to apply to all development. And that's really, ultimately, what we should be talking about. In Milwaukee, similarly, after the Park East Redevelopment Compact, they passed what's more ordinance, which requires local hiring, prevailing wage, a whole series of standards, use of minority contractors on all city subsidized projects. And so it's not unusual to move from a particular project, demonstrate the success of these policies, and then turn them into broader local policies. So I'm going to kind of wrap up this part here, and obviously we'll have time for some discussion and questions. But I've talked a little bit about some of the technical questions and some of the best practices that arise in community benefit organizing. The strength of any agreement depends on how well organized the coalition is. You know, the examples I've given you, Pittsburgh and the Bronx, they were, Oakland, they were coalitions that were very strong. They could turn out people at necessary times. They were able to have meetings with elected officials, and the strength of the coalition definitely impacted the success. You know, Woody Guthrie kind of had it right when he wrote lyrics to "This Land Is Your Land." This is our land. We're not outsiders. We're stakeholders, and we have a right to a seat at the table when the decisions are being made.
I think what we're going to do is I'm going to let Andre speak, and I'm going to give John and Andre a little bit of a chance to dialogue with each other, and then we will definitely take questions. And like I said earlier, for some folks who came in, if you have to leave before your question is answered, write it down. We'll have a page by the door, and we'll make sure it gets answered. So yeah, and thank you to Michael Glavin and Irma Flores and Sue Thomas from the city for joining us. We're really excited that you guys are here also. So Andre, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you. My name is Andre Leroux, the Executive Director of the Massachusetts Smart Growth Alliance. We've just heard John talk about community benefit agreements, and I'm here to talk about community benefit districts. I think that a lot of people get confused about these two concepts because they sound similar. And I also think that it's seen as maybe an either-or type of choice that needs to be made. But that's not why I'm here. So for the first part, I would say set aside the terminology around community benefit district. Really what I'm talking about is district management. Whatever kind of entity or name you want to call it, it's district management. And in other parts of the country, it could be called business improvement districts, it could be called community improvement districts, and so on. So I just want to make sure that we start off from the beginning in the right frame of mind, not saying that these are not two competing tools. They're different tools. The second thing that I would say is that because the focus is really on management, it's not about a negotiation with the developer, right? This is a vehicle for getting some things done. It's not going to tell you what kinds of things to get done. So the Massachusetts Smart Growth Alliance over the last couple of years has really identified district management as a critical gap in our state's laws and the tools that we offer local communities. And I'll explain a little bit why I think that. municipalities throughout the state, really throughout the United States, are strapped. They struggle to provide even the basic services that we expect them to provide. And in places that are walkable, that have are mixed use, so they have a lot of things going on there, communities really don't have the resources to manage those kinds of areas, to give the kinds of tender, loving care that those special places like our downtowns, our town centers, and our neighborhood main streets need. And so that's a real gap, right? In Massachusetts, we have things are going on at the state level, things are going on at the municipal level. We don't have so much going on at the neighborhood level, the sublocal level. We don't have so much going on at the regional level. So this addresses one of those gaps that I think we have. And increasingly, people want to live in places that are vibrant, where they can live and work and go to restaurants, have good access to outdoor space and quality parks. And here in Massachusetts now, we have the benefit of history on our side. We have a lot of communities that predate the automobile. So if you walk around with an urban planner or an architect, they'll say, oh, this place has got great bones, right? Well, yeah, we have a lot of places that have great bones, but that's the hardware. What we lack, and we surprisingly lack as a state, we're pretty far behind, is the software of managing those places. And so we have the Smart Growth Alliance, and there are very few people in Massachusetts that really know how to do this. So we ended up looking outside for experts nationally that have some experience in this. We've done a lot of work with Marco Lamandri, who the city of Somerville has also contracted with for some work around other parts of the city. And Marco is somebody who manages several community benefit districts in California. He's based in San Diego. He's helped create 75 different districts in different states all across the country. So he's well aware of the different kinds of legislation that exists in different places. And so we designed a bill in part with his expertise, in part with our homegrown expertise here in Massachusetts, to say what would work here for us. We, for the last 20 years, have had a tool on the books called Business Improvement Districts. And that tool, after 20 years, has only generated 5 districts right now. In fact, we've lost 2 of them over the last couple of years. So we're going in the wrong direction. And we began to think, well, what's wrong? Why aren't communities, when this is a tool that could benefit dozens of communities across the state, why aren't we using this tool? And we came to the conclusion that, in part, it's just the basic framing of it, right? People aren't that interested in business improvement districts. That's an idea that originated in the 70s and 80s when a lot of people were leaving our walkable areas, our cities and towns, and moving further out to the suburbs. And a lot of the businesses that had historically anchored the downtown areas got together and said, you know what, we need to do something to change the marketing of this area so that our historic customers who have now moved out to the suburbs feel comfortable coming back into the cities to do the shopping, right? And so I think that that's a concept that's really dated at this point and doesn't resonate very well with our communities. Nowadays, we want diverse communities. We want places where you can live and work and recreate all at the same place. We just don't have enough of these here in Massachusetts. And part of the reason why is because we don't have the management structures to help support them. So what kinds of things do these district management entities do? Maybe I should walk through basically how they get formed and then the kinds of tasks that they can take on. What happens typically with a district management entity, and it depends on the state, but what we're proposing here in Massachusetts is that there's a petition process. And the petition needs the signatures of at least 50%, well, property owners representing at least 50% in assessed valuation, the district that's being covered. Now, what's also different about our proposal than what traditionally has been a business improvement district is that property owners are really broadly defined. And that includes not only private property owners, but it includes public property owners and nonprofit property owners. Because again, another way in which our communities have fundamentally changed over the last decades is that the anchors of our communities are no longer the local bank. They're no longer the, the department store. It's really our nonprofit institutions, right? Our educational institutions, our healthcare institutions, even in many cases our public agencies and offices. And so those are the uses, those are the employers that are not going anywhere. They're anchored in place. And so by broadly defining property owners to include everybody, we really change the sense of what a district management entity can be. It's not by and for private property owners. It's for all of us in the community, right? Now, of course, the financing mechanism for a district management entity is based on an assessment of property value, right? It's not a tax, not an additional tax, although it can be collected by the city as part of the property taxes, but it never goes into the city budget. It gets directly collected and sent to this entity. In our proposal, that entity has to be a nonprofit 501c3 organization, a tax-exempt organization that has broad community participation. And we think that that requirement is important, again, so that we're not, it's not a membership organization. It's really an organization that's representing the community. It can also raise money philanthropically and get individual donations, apply for grants, and so on. So when you have a petition that meets the threshold of at least 50% in value of the property owners, that petition can then move forward to the City Council, Board of Aldermen in this case. And the Board of Aldermen needs to hold a public hearing and then take a vote on whether or not to approve this district. Because if the district is approved, then all of the property owners in that district have to participate in it. Now, one more thing about the petition. Every property owner that signs that petition knows what they're signing up for. They know exactly the cost of what the fee will be that they'll pay in for their specific properties, and they're signing off on a governance structure, and they're signing off on a management plan. And that management plan can include a number of different things. The management plan will basically lay out what the functions of the organization will carry out, right? The community benefit district will accomplish. So everybody knows like what it's for and how much they're paying into it. Some of the things that a management entity like a CBD can do are provide transportation services and parking management, streetscape and public space improvements, branding and marketing of the district, sidewalk cleaning and snow removal, public art, planning and design feedback on specific projects, cultural programming and events, signage, wayfinding, placemaking types of activities, street furniture, landscaping and tree trimming. And then there's a whole host of other entrepreneurial types of services that they can do. There can be a shared valet parking service, for example, so that each individual business doesn't have to worry about providing a valet or providing its own parking. And instead you have the community benefit district entity can do that. They can also develop historical plaques telling the story of the district. They can undertake capital campaigns, because they're as a 501c3 organization, to create improvements to the parks and public spaces and plazas. They can even, in some cases we've seen situations where the management entity has worked with the local school to improve the neighborhood play spaces. And because there's a community benefit there, there's community access there. If you get new residents moving into a community. They come with a lot of pets, so they do things like provide the pet doggy bags for cleanup, and in some cases they've even developed dog parks. And then they can also do things like, one of Marco's districts out in San Diego, he's helped found the Little Italy district in San Diego, which is probably the most flourishing Little Italy, surprisingly enough. The only reason why the Little Italy's flooding is so successful out in San Diego, it's really because of this management entity, this community benefit district. They've been able to tell the story of the district. They've been able to work with all of the local business owners to ensure that independent businesses and locally owned businesses stay there. They've been able to keep out the chains, and there's not one chain in there, no Starbucks competing with the local Italian cafes. And they've even been able to create relationships with Italy and been able to attract Italian entrepreneurs and immigrants, so that they're creating this whole cultural, they're renewing the cultural aspect of the district. And I think that's an important and fascinating piece of what a good CBD can accomplish. So I guess I'll say, that we have Main Streets organizations, and there's a Union Square Main Streets. And so I think like a CBD, the intention is to accomplish many of the same kinds of things that Main Street organization does. But what really hampers Main Street's organizations in our country is that there's a lack of a sustainable financing, right, and governance tool. So you have a situation where you have oftentimes one person who's the director, keeping the doors open, trying to do all of these things, maybe some of which I just mentioned, but without a team and by themselves, and really has to spend a lot of their time keeping the doors open. The resources that's generated by this mechanism takes care of that problem, and so that you can have a real team of people whose job and focus it is in this case Union Square. And this is a function that even local government, even city government cannot do. There's nobody, if you go to City Hall, whose job it is just to manage Union Square. It's the same thing with Davis Square, same thing with Ball Square, other places. So this is a way in which local businesses, property owners, residents, nonprofits can identify their own agenda and execute that agenda, right? And so, in distinction from a CBA, right, this is really about what happens over time. How do we have capacity to manage the kind of district that we want to have here? And I think that there potentially are opportunities even for both of these tools to be at play. A CBA is really about what are you getting for the private development that's happening in a district, right? And what is it that those stakeholders at that point in time can put on the table? But a CBD is really about ongoing maintenance of it. Now, some aspects of what could be in a community benefit agreement could be incorporated into the management plan of a community benefit district. And that could just be part of the work of what this entity carries out going forward. It's a way of creating jobs as well, right? So depending on how much revenue is being created on an annual basis through this, you can have, 10, 12 people working full-time generated by this district. You can have a team of sort of landscapers, people who are cleaning up the trash, taking care of the sidewalks, doing the landscaping, all of those kinds of things. You can have a marketing specialist. You have the director of the organization. You can have a social media person. I mean, whatever it is that you're trying to carry out can do those things. It's really around the management plan. And so why I'm really excited about community benefit districts in Massachusetts is because it's a really flexible tool that we don't have. And it's something that can really fit your needs of whatever the program is that you want to develop. So in some cases, you could have, there's cultural districts that have been created in Massachusetts with no financial mechanism for sustaining that work. Well, you could have a cultural district could create a community benefit district to create that governance structure and management entity and financial tool that will sustain that work to really turn it into a functioning cultural district. You could have, I don't know if anybody's familiar with the term eco-district, but this is a term around sustainability where there are some places really to look at how a district, a local district, is sustainable in a green way. That could be something that a community benefit district could carry out. That could be the content of the program. There's a lot of different ways that you could go about looking at it. Main Street's organizations could convert to community benefit districts and sustain themselves. So the other thing that I would say is that a good community benefit district doesn't just rely on the fees that are generated through the property values. They also try to diversify what they do. So I've mentioned some ways in which they can be entrepreneurial. They can host and manage farmers markets, for example. They can do the shared valet. They can manage parking. They can have a sort of a memorandum of understanding with the municipality, right, with the city itself, so that they could manage some of the parking resources, or that a piece of the meter revenue, for example, stays in the district for whatever it is that the services want to be provided for that. And they can also, we have another piece of legislation that we're working on too, which are parking benefit districts. And this is a complementary tool that would enable that parking money to stay in a district if a city so desires that to happen. So I think I'll leave it there so we can start talking.